All right, CNT125, Subnet Application Lab. In the last podcast, we just got done configuring the switches with their IPs. I'll get our map up here. The switches with their IP addresses, and then we configured the 2011 router with its interfaces and IP addresses and OSPF config, and then the 4221 router with its interface, OSPF config, etc. So what we're going to do now is take a minute and look at your setup. You want to look at your interfaces and make sure you see green blinky link lights next to all your switch ports and your router ports, so double check. You also want to take a minute, and whatever device you're on this router, we'll just do a show run. And I'm going to carefully take a look at the interfaces. Let's make sure the interface addresses are correct. So I'm going to compare them against my map, make sure that, this interface is correct, this interface is correct. Make sure you don't see, I'll show you down here. I think we see it on this one down here. No, actually we don't. Okay. On this one, I want to look under my interfaces and make sure I don't see the word shut down. If I do, I need to make sure I do the no shutdown to bring that port online. So I'm checking IP addresses. I'm making sure the ports are on. If anything is not right, stop now, go back to that interface and re-input the IP and subnet mask and get it correct. The same thing is true with our OSPF config. I'm going to make sure that my 3 subnets are there. I'm going to look for my, my case 00, 16, 0, 32, 0. I'm going to make sure they're in there and correct. If they're not correct, again, go back, router OSPF 2. Whatever the bad one is, type no and paste in that bad one. It'll get rid of it, and put the new one in. Put the correct one in. Fix that now. And the other thing I'll do is, this was my 4221, so I'm going to move over to my 2011. So I'll move over to the 2011 router. I'm going to move the console cable into there real quick. And I will do the same thing here. There we go. I have some cables falling over here. There we go. Class. So do a show run. Again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to double check my IP addresses, make sure they're correct, Under my interfaces, I want to make sure I don't see shutdown. I do not want to see that. I want to make sure that I don't see that under the interface. So check the interface, check the IP. Down here under the routing protocol config, same thing. I'm checking to make sure my 3 subnets are there. Again, now's the time to fix that. Once I've made sure that is correct, I'm then going to connect my clients in. Now, I actually connected this client in already. He's sitting over here ready to go. I'm going to now connect this one in. This is the one I'm currently using right now. So I will go to its network settings. I'll go down here in the corner to network and internet. I'm going to pick the network and sharing. I'm going to use my Ethernet 3. That's the NIC that's on the back of my computer. I'll say properties. I'll say TCP/IP properties. And I plugged this in previously, but it would be, it would start off with obtain IP address automatically. Click your static. Plug your IP, subnet mask, and gateway in. Remember, get that from your map. That's why you did that work. And the gateway address is the router interface, doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doop, that you're attached to. In this case, it's this address for me. Okay, that's where I'm getting all that information. So I'll make sure all that's correct. I will say OK. Do not use this to close it out, because that's going to basically nullify and say ignore everything I did. So use the OK, use the close. And once I've done that, I'll open my command prompt to do IP config. And I'm going to verify my Ethernet 3 is correct. Good. We're doing good so far. What I do now, I'm going to close some of this out just for simplicity's sake. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a couple ping tests. I'm going to ping my local network. Okay, so here I'm going to take this workstation and ping my gateway address. And then I will take this workstation and ping the gateway address. And I want to make sure that LAN connection is working. So ping 172.16.0.1 is the gateway address for this guy. And I get it successful. Yay. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. 172.16.32.1 is its gateway. So I'm going to ping that. And again, I get it successful. Good. That tells me my LAN is working. The next thing I do is I'm going to try to ping across my WAN. I'm going to try to ping across the WAN. So on this guy, I'm going to try to ping. I'm on this workstation here. I'm going to try to ping the whole way across to 32.10. So 32.10. And we get a successful yay. Just as a side note, earlier when I did this today, my other node across there was not responding because I had the firewall on. So for that one, I made sure that I had a rule in there to allow ping through. That's just a little side note. Those are things that can pop up for you from time to time. Now that I have successful ping, I'm also going to do a trace route. I'm going to do a trace RT 172.16.32.10. And I should see it hitting my first router, my next router, and then finally that node on the far side. Again, I'm making sure that node is over there and awake and it's not asleep or anything like that. So 172.16.01, that's the first router, 16.2 is the next router, and I'm hopefully going to see 32.10 is the last hop, and I do. Yay! So that's telling me my network is up and running, or in this case, my subnetting plan is up and running. Good. Now that I have everything functioning, I'm going to gather some results from my network. And again, if any of this is not working, backtrack, go back here, start with, again, cables. Make sure the cables are in the right port. Don't assume. Make sure under the interfaces you do not see the word shutdown. If you do, issue the no shutdown command. Make sure the addresses are correct. If they're not, go into that interface and re-input the IP. It'll overwrite the bad one. Also do the show IP route. Make sure you see all of the networks. If you don't, we want to check the OSPF config. With the OSPF config, again here, if you have a bad network, if one of these is not right, you'll go to router OSPF, and you'll type in no, and then you'll put in the bad network, and that'll get rid of it. And then you can type in network blah 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 and put the correct one in. Okay, so there's a couple troubleshooting tips for that. That'll help you a lot. All right, what I'll do now is I am going to look at, and it doesn't matter which router I'm on. I'm going to do show IP route, and I do want to look at the routing table. And this will show me my 3 subnets. It says blah network is subnetted 3 subnets. Yay! So there is my 0 subnet, 62, and 32 subnet. I'm doing little fist pumps in the air. That is my subnetted network up and running. That means my subnets are working. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to do Control-C to copy. I'll open my notepad. So I'll say notepad here. And I will paste in Control-V. And I will save this. I'm going to go to my 125 folder here. 125. And I'm going to call this 125 subnet lab. And I'll call it my routing table. Something like that. Routing table. And that shows that my network is indeed up and running. While I'm also here, I'll start using my console and I'll plug into this router, show run and save the config. I'll plug into this router, show run and config, show run, copy and paste, and then I'll do my 2 switches. Okay, I will gather all those configs. So here on this router, again, show run, space, space, space. I'll scroll up here to where I see the command show run. I'll copy all of that, and I'll use my Control-C. I'll open Notepad. If I want to put it in the same one, I could, but I'm going to open a new one. I'll say New, and I will put in here Control-V. That's my 2011 config, and I'll call this Save As. 125 Subnet Lab. And I'll call it the 2011 config, something like that. And I'll move my console to the 4221, do the same thing. I'll move the console to the top switch, do the same thing. Bottom switch, do the same thing. So I'm going to slowly gather all my configs. That way you'll show all of the implemented subnet configuration. When I'm done, I do need to do some cleanup. Let me pause for a second while I gather all my configs. All right. Just while you were gone there, so you didn't have to watch it all, I actually saved my 2011 config, 4221 config, bottom switch config, and top switch config. So I do actually have them all in text files. I figured there's no sense you watching me do all of that, but do take a minute, make sure you have all of that. The last thing we need to do is we do need to do a cleanup. Now, all we really need to do is erase the startup config on these, because we didn't do any VLANs or anything. So as long as you erase the startup config, when we power down the lab rack, these switches and routers, when they boot up, will come up with no config. So on my switches and routers, I just need to do an erase start. Oops. If I do erase start, it may not understand that. This switch happened to, but some of our lab switches are not. So you might need to do erase startup config and hit the enter key. Now on reboot, there's nothing in memory for it to boot up. So what I'll do is there's my bottom switch. I'll move over to my top switch real quickly. I'll repeat the same command. I'll do erase startup config, enter. That's it. I'll move it to my router, same thing. Here's my 4221. Enable. I'll do, there's the router. Okay, so erase startup config, enter. Enter, give it a second. Again on reboot, that'll come up clean. And then if I do it to my 2811, same thing. I'll move him down here. Where are you, console? There you are. Here's my 2011, so erase start on this guy as well. Give it a second. Now when the lab rack powers down, all of my devices the next time when power up will come up with no config. The other thing I need to do is move my workstation, or disconnect my patch cables. My patch cables I use to connect my routers and switches. And my workstations, I'll move those patch cables back to the room network. And the only thing left to do is make sure you save these files. Make sure you save these files that you had in the lab. Save them to something like your Google Drive. And then get them to D2L. Save them to Google Drive so you have a copy. And then get them D2L for submission. And the only thing left are just these two questions. Don't miss them right here. Number one, what's a subnet? Number two, what are subnets used for? Okay, don't answer number two with to create more networks. Okay, let's be a little more specific. Whoa, what are subnets used for? What do we actually use them for? Okay, so there is our subnet application lab.